We're going to start with the prepared environment. This concept is one of the cornerstones of what makes Montessori unique. Are you all familiar with that term, the prepared environment?
Vaguely. I don't remember the exact definition, but I'm pretty sure I understand what it means.
Okay, that's good. Well, I've got a little bit of a definition for you on this page. What is it? Everything in the classroom is carefully designed and chosen by the teacher to facilitate maximum independent learning and exploration by the child. So the prepared environment itself is one of the main educators of the child. Does anybody understand what that means or how it would be possible for an environment to educate kids?
So, like, if there's too many things out on the shelf, that's overstimulating and they're not learning anything from that. So you start off with as minimal things as possible so they can focus more easily on what they find.
That could be an example, definitely. So you need to know the kids in your classroom to determine what materials should be available. And that might be an abundance of materials. Like in the twos room, you guys have to make sure you have out enough materials for each child to be interested in multiple things throughout the day, or they're going to wreak havoc. Where in a children's house classrooms, more minimal is better in the beginning because they need to be able to focus on specific activities. So it really is different for every classroom and every student depending on what their immediate needs are. So we're going to go through a lot of different ways that the prepared environment helps to educate kids. But I love this quote. This quote really demonstrates the power of the prepared environment. The first aim of the prepared environment, as far as it is possible, is to render the growing child independent of the adult. What does that mean to you guys?
I think that means that we don't have to walk around and hold their hand all day, and we don't have to do everything for them. We can let them go, and they can go, and based off of what we provided for them, they can figure it out themselves and learn how to do things.
Absolutely. So it's some self-sufficiency going on. We don't have to hold their hands, like you put it. So one of the first components of what the prepared environment is freedom. So that can mean a lot of different things. It gives them freedom of movement, freedom of choice, freedom of exploration of their natural impulses. What kind of natural impulses do a lot of kids have?
Just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing.
Yeah, they want to be able to get up and move when they want to get up and move. Mm-hmm. Anything else you guys can think of?
I think freedom to touch things on the shelves.
Yeah, through the mouth, everything's board.
Well, we try to avoid the mouth, but
that's where it goes.
At this age anyway, we're trying to avoid the mouth. Yeah. But yeah, certainly to touch, to explore, to use as many of their senses as they can, and as many of the materials as they can.
I noticed with different textures, they have different impulses. Like if it's scratchy, they want to scratch it. If it's squishy, they want to squeeze it. If it's soft, they all like pet it and stroke it. And you have to take it away from them to get them to stop.
Yeah. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, that they want to keep repeating those processes. Repetition. Yes, so repetition is huge. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Enough room for children to move safely and easily without disturbing others. So the way that you arrange the environment itself, you want to make sure that there's enough spots for them to go and to be able to sit in this area or that area, to be able to move and get the materials from the shelf that they need without bumping into somebody. So it's really important that you set up your room in a way that helps them with their movement. And then we've already talked about this, but it helps children develop independence and confidence to choose and carry out activities by themselves. The confidence is a really important component too, because if kids don't feel comfortable or confident with something, they're less likely to branch out and do other things because they don't feel capable of doing something. So they're going to be more reserved and not be as explorative in the classroom. But the independence, of course, is very important as well. Structure and order. All the materials that are available should be interesting, organized, and complete. So interesting, we have found that, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but natural materials tend to be more interesting than plastic materials. Being organized, the way that your shelves look, we want it to be decluttered. We want to have simple lines. We want it to be obvious where materials belong, what it's supposed to look like when they put it back. You know, if it's a mess when they get it from the shelf, how can you expect them to put it back and make it look nice? So you have to constantly be preparing your environment every day and even multiple times throughout the day to make sure that the materials on your shelf look the way that they're supposed to look. And then complete. This is a really important component, that if a material is missing a piece or something is broken from it, you should not have it on the shelf, because you're setting the expectation for the child that it's okay for materials to go missing. So as soon as something goes missing from an activity, we pull it up. We take it away until we find the missing or broken, or repair the broken piece. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Material should contain the element of self-correction. We are going to be pointing out in every activity that we introduce if there is some self-correction that goes along with that. Sometimes it's just, did all of the beans make it into the cup that they were supposed to make it into? Or it could be a specific material. See if I have something here. So this is a great example of self-correction. There are only the proper number of cylinders to fit in here, and only each cylinder will fit properly in its right hole. So this is a very obvious one where some of the activities are not quite as obvious what that is. The younger a student is, the less that there is a self-correction, as more as the teacher kind of provides that self-correction for them. So we'll go over that in more depth as we introduce different activities. The shelves are ordered from simple to complex. This too is much easier in an older classroom, but it can be done in a younger classroom. The primary difficulty in a younger classroom is that kids don't always put things back exactly where they found them. In the twos room, they start putting them back close to the right shelf. If you get it on the right shelf, that's great, but it's not going to be in the same order that they found it. Where even younger kids, or some kids that move into the twos classroom, or even some of the 2.5-year-olds that move up, don't even get it on the right shelf.
Yeah. So, like up top, do the simple, down below, do the
Yeah, and
more
even
complex?
from left to right. It's from top to bottom, left to right. Should be simple to complex.
And I've been trying to get some of the older ones, like Henry and Sawyer and Maddox. I've been having them help me put stuff away. And when Henry tries to take it to one shelf, I'll say, no, it goes on this shelf, and redirecting them to the right shelf, and
that's
hoping
good.
that over time they'll start to do it themselves.
That's good.
How would we do that with our math shelf? Because
So there are some exceptions. That with tall shelves, a lot of times we'll put the most advanced materials on the top, because you don't want the really little small ones to get to them. Because, especially the ones that have like a ton of beads that go with it. And plus it's too tall for them to reach anyway. So that would be the only exception. You do at whatever level you're starting, you want it to go from that simplest to most complex, but then you can reserve the top shelf or two for the really complex things.
Okay.
And then tables and work rugs are the way that we structure and order our classroom. Kids have a choice. They can work at the table, or they can work on the floor with a work rug. The work rug itself gives them that structure of the environment, orderliness. You know, your materials need to stay on the work rug.
One thing we've got to work on is our kids are not wanting to get work rugs, so we're going to do some more teaching on that.
Yeah. And one thing that you'll start to recognize as you start introducing lessons or practicing your lessons, you always start and end an activity at the shelf. That way, at the beginning of your activity, they know where the material belongs, and at the end of the activity, they know where the material belongs. So that's the first thing that they see, and the last thing that they see is where the material goes. And the other thing is, you're constantly using a work rug or your table space when you're demonstrating. So that's part of the activity, is the setting up and the taking down of your work rug, even if you're using that. The beauty of the environment is one of the key components of a Montessori classroom, and what your prepared environment should be at the end or the beginning of each day, really. But before you leave, when you're setting your classroom up for the next day, or if you come in the morning and set it up, you should take a step back, look at your classroom, and ask yourself, does this look beautiful? And if it doesn't, what can we do to make it look better? But this is a good example, this picture in here, of what a Montessori classroom looks like. It's very subtle. You know, there's not a lot of flashy colors. There's not a ton of things up on the wall. Everything that's in the classroom serves a particular purpose. You can see there are a couple of art hangings on the wall. There are several plants in the classroom to bring in a lot of that nature. The shelves are wooden. The tables and chairs are wooden. Ideally, that's what our classrooms would look like. Of course, we do have budgets we have to abide by, so we can't replace everything all at once, but when we replace materials, that's what we look for. And then, of course, the shelves are all neat and orderly. The materials look complete. The floor is very nice. So keeping uncluttered, well-maintained environments, it should reflect peace and tranquility. This is a home away from home for the kids. We want it to be an environment that they're comfortable in, that they can focus. If you have all this bright color and, noise going on all the time, it's really hard to really focus on what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So the beauty of the environment is welcoming and comforting, and walls should not be overstimulating or crowded. Nature and reality. So we hit on this a little bit before, but we want as many natural materials as possible. Not just meaning like wood, but things that actually work. So a good example here, this is a dishwashing station. It's something that they actually get to put water in, put soap in, they have real dishes, a sponge, they get to wash dishes by hand. This is very different than what you would see in a traditional preschool setting, like a play kitchen set. Not that that doesn't have its value, but you get to do real things with the materials that are in the Montessori classroom. But you want the materials to be child size, something that they can manipulate. If it's too big for their little hands to be able to use, then it's not going to be as realistic for them. Something that appeals to all 5 senses. So again, the dishwashing station is a perfect example of this. The soap is going to be smelly. Hopefully the dishes aren't stinky, but but they get to get in there and really use their senses and splash in the water, and it's fun for them to do, but they're learning a real skill underneath it. We want in the beginning to focus on one element at a time, and we're really going to break down that throughout the course. We're going to start with the simplest activities and move to more complex activities. Again, the dishwashing station is a perfect example of how you need to isolate the difficulty for a child. How many different skills can you think of that would be required in washing dishes? You guys think of anything? Think of the whole setup process and breakdown process of what this child is doing. They need to be able to get water from the sink. They need to be able to carry the water. They need to be able to use a sponge, know how to absorb water, how to squeeze a sponge, how to transfer liquids, how to pour from a glass, because they're going to be getting liquid inside of their containers and pouring it. Cleaning up spills, wiping up spills, drying the dishes, dumping water. I mean, there's a million different, maybe not a million, it's an exaggeration, but there are a lot of different skills that a child needs to have before they can do an activity like this. So it is your job to recognize how to break down that activity and just introduce one skill at a time before jumping to something like this.
What age range would be doing that kind of activity?
2s and above.
2s and above.
Yeah, we introduce it in the choose class. A lot of the basic activities that go into this will be introduced in the infant or toddler rooms, though. Simple to complex, we just talked about. Concrete to abstract, so we want to focus on those concrete skills, which, just like the dishwashing station, we're not using our imagination.
That's concrete.
It's very hands-on, very concrete, and also goes into imagination versus fantasy. Does anybody know the difference between imagination versus fantasy?
Is fantasy like not real?
Fantasy is not real, yeah.
And
So we focus on imagination in a Montessori environment. That means, okay, an example would be science fiction versus fantasy. So Star Trek versus Star Wars. You guys familiar? Oh, okay, that doesn't help. So Star Trek is based on our reality extrapolated into the future. So it's something that could possibly happen in the future. Where Star Wars is based on an entirely different solar system with superpowers and different things like that. So when we are working with a child on using their imagination, we give them hands-on materials that start from a concrete place, so that way when they get to home and they're using a baby doll, they're not pretending the baby doll can fly around the room. They're pretending the baby doll wants to eat food, or they're changing the baby doll's diaper, or they want to give the baby doll a bath.
Making the connection.
I was looking for my phone and I thought I lost it.
Yay, it's in there.
Is that why you had your mom's phone?
No, she forgot her poem,
I
actually.
think I remember you using that example last year. I was trying to go over it, like, wait, oh, I knew it.
I knew what it was, yeah. I like to use the
that
same
'cause
examples.
I never knew that before.
What?
That's
The difference, yeah. So, I mean, there is a very distinct difference between imagination and fantasy. The main thing to realize is that children at this young age don't understand the difference. So if we're introducing fantastical ideas to them, they might think it's real. So when we talk about dinosaurs, for example, those were real things that did exist. And we can talk about how they used to exist, and we can introduce the names of them, but we're not pretending that they still exist and that they can go visit them somewhere.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I've seen a couple of the kids pretend that some of the materials are like animals.
Yeah.
And stuff. And so that's fine,
Mhm.
right? But if it's like dragons and stuff like that, the fantasy stuff.
Well, I mean, depending on what the material is, you probably want to redirect them to what the purpose of the material is. But yeah, I mean, we'll steer more towards one area than the other for things like that. And it's primarily also the things you're introducing. So we don't necessarily prohibit a child from pretending something fantastical, but we're not going to introduce it to them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be introduced to things at home. I mean, most kids watch Disney movies, and they are pretty much pure fantasy in most of them. But that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It's just not something that we want to focus on because they don't understand the difference. Social environment plays a huge part. Once we get into Children's House, we're focusing on multi-age classrooms. You like the picture?
In the background.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. I had never noticed that before. Yeah, that's hilarious. So even though we don't have multi-age classrooms in the toddler or the twos room, there is such a vast difference between a 24-month and a 36-month-old. And the development is huge in that 1 year. I mean, in every classroom that we have before the age of 3, there's huge jumps in their development. And so it's important to know what that development should look like and also to utilize that to your benefit. So we're constantly using the older kids in the classroom to promote the social expectations that you guys have for the younger kids. They can be your helpers, they can be your mentors, they can do lots of things in the classroom to help you as teachers.
Yeah, and I've noticed there's a certain point where the older kids start to get where they're not as interested in the work when they come to the point where they're about ready to move out, and that's a good time to start getting them to be teacher helpers. Like Henry, Sawyer, Maddox, they like helping us do stuff, and it's a big help actually because they go do stuff so that then we can go do something else.
Yes.
It's actually really great.
Yes, use it to your benefit for sure. And it is interesting as you get to know the kids and get to understand the materials better, you start seeing that they're not interested in certain things any longer. And so this should hopefully help you understand what you should be introducing next. That there's never a peak where a child has learned too much for a classroom. There's always something more that we can do. So that will promote positive development of strong relationships within the classroom. A lot of kids actually listen better to their peers than they do to teachers or the adult figure in the classroom. So utilize that to your advantage as well. And sometimes that can be in a negative way because you have older students not doing very good things in the classroom, and then that will obviously negatively impact the younger kids. So you really want to put a lot of time into developing the older kids in the class.
I'll tell one of my older ones to help the younger one, and when the older one goes up to them, they're like, "You're not the teacher. I'm not listening to you."
Oh, the kids too?
Yeah. They're like, "You're not the teacher. You don't tell me what to do."
Well,
they're not really telling them. They're kind of helping them.
They're helping them.
Their
That's
point of
really
view is
funny.
you tell them what to do.
A little bossy.
That's funny. Well, we can work on that a little bit, I guess.
That's why she's working with me.
But for the older ones, hopefully it helps them develop compassion and empathy. They can see themselves as that child. They were recently there, so they know what it feels like. They know the struggles, they know the frustrations, and so they can provide some empathy that we are a little bit more separated from. It's been a long time since we were that age or we were having those types of difficulties. So younger kids can oftentimes be more compassionate than we can in certain situations. And then, of course, we talked about the leadership and mentorship opportunities. And of course, we can't forget the intellectual environment. Properly prepared environment allows the child to reach his full learning potential. Bonus points for anybody who can recite our mission statement.
I'm not gonna do it. I don't need any advice. I know it though.
Is it? Well, I've done this before. If you
Our
try
school's
first.
mission is to provide an authentic Montessori. Oh my gosh, hold on.
Do you know it?
I know the rest, but since I've done it before, do you guys want to try?
I don't know it. Yeah, I haven't. No. Oh, I know it.
Let Elena do it. You've said it to me several times.
To provide an authentic Montessori learning experience.
Educational experience.
Educational experience.
So that
Oh, there's more?
Our
Oh, no.
our children can reach their full learning potential and have a positive
Why do you
impact
have
on
it
our
right
community
there?
and the
What's
world.
that?
I know.
Wait a minute.
Nobody noticed, so I wasn't going to say anything.
I
Of course,
knew it was
we
there.
would
That's
be-
why I turned
You
away.
pointed that out last year, but of course we would be on the same too.
I've still got glasses and I still can't read it, so we're good.
So full learning potential is part of our mission, and a Montessori environment really does help kids achieve whatever that is for them. And if your
have a
environment is
positive impact
prepared.
on their community, on the world.
Yes.
Do you have it memorized or do you just read it every
Oh
day?
no, I have it memorized. I helped
Figured
write
you
it,
probably
so
did.
hopefully I have it memorized.
I know it.
Just being in the traditional daycare versus the Montessori, it is night and day. I mean, just what
It really is.
what
Yeah.
the kids that are in the Montessori, I mean, they just know so much more. They can do so much more than a kid playing with a Tonka truck. I mean, yeah, it's amazing.
I love hearing stories from people who've been recently in a different type setting, because it's been so long since I have that, I kind of take it for granted that other places aren't so different.
You put a kid that's in a regular daycare into this, they're gonna be like,
What do I do? And then you can see why with new students it can take a while to
Yeah.
adjust,
Yeah.
because it is very different. The expectations are
I
very
just
different.
wrote.
The intellectual environment is made possible by giving the available materials that would accommodate the particular developmental needs of the students in your environment. So you need to know who your kids are, you need to know where they are developmentally, you need to know what their interests are, so that you can properly provide the materials that they want and need to work with.
Some of them
Which-
that's easy, like Daniel, who likes anything that's ball
Yeah.
or resembles a ball.
That's true.
Circular, yeah.
That's true. And then this plays into sensitive periods, which we're going to talk more about sensitive periods later, but a brief overview of a sensitive period. Anybody?
When a child's focused on one piece of work for a long period of time.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a long period of time,
Okay,
but it's
fine,
like,
they're focused on
yes,
something.
it can be. Sometimes it is a very long period of time, but it's one particular skill that a child wants to acquire that they'll just keep repeating the same activities over and over and over again because they want to master a particular skill.
Like Violet and Waterworks.
Oh my god.
Yes, so you'll get kids going through sensitive period with waterworks, especially the younger
Well,
kids.
there's a point where I have to take it away.
You could introduce something similar if they're like constantly doing the exact same activity. You could encourage them to work with something different, but that's going to fulfill the same need. Toileting is a huge sensitive period. So kids will learn how to use the toilet so much faster if we catch them when they are in the sensitive period for learning that skill. And that's true of any skill. Are you much more inclined to learn something that you're interested in learning? Definitely. I know I am. If I don't want to learn something, then it's just going to keep going over my head. So that's why we really focus on learning the individual child's cues on what they want to learn and what they're ready to learn, so that we can introduce it when they're ready for it. So it's kind of a big job that you guys have. So this is probably my favorite quote of all time from Maria Montessori. The greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, the children are now working as if I did not exist.
That is awesome.
I've experienced that before. It's awesome.
Where you literally get to step back and observe your students, which is what you should be doing most of the time, is observing your students. You should probably 50% of the time be observing, 25% of the time being giving lessons, and 25% of the time planning or prepping things.
I think sometimes that's hard because it feels like I should be doing something. And when I'm standing still, I feel like
No, and that is really hard, especially when you're from a more traditional center where you're constantly 100% engaged with the kids. It is harder to step back and know, I am really busy right now observing, because you have to know, in order to be able to properly prepare your environment, you have to know your kids. In order to know your kids, you have to observe them.
Well, and with the variety of children that we have in our class, everybody's at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to, you know, be able to do that at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it is.
At the middle and the end of the year, I can see we're going to be able to do that. We'll be able to step back and.
Well, and it's
do
even partnering with the teachers in your classroom and, you know, taking turns. Like,
Yeah,
right
that's
now
what
I need you
we
to
do.
be doing this group so I can step back and observe this group. And so it's working with the teachers in your classroom so you can take turns and really make sure, I need you to be doing this so that I can do this, and communicating openly between each other.
So is it good?
Yeah, because then I can focus on the older ones and not have the little ones come over and take things from them.
Yeah.
You're focusing on them.
All right, and now I have a little video clip that I'd like to show you guys. This is a 3-hour work cycle in 3 minutes. So this is a Children's House student, but this is what this quote embodies. Seeing a child from start to finish of the day do things very independently. Now this is a 4-year-old, so a little bit older than you guys. I wouldn't expect them to do a full 3-hour work cycle, but we're doing like an hour and a half to 2 hours in your classroom. Hopefully we can get some of your kids doing that for 3 hours in the morning. They do, good. So